Coming up on International Trade Focus, we shall take a look at the impact of COVID-19 on productivity, employment, and labor. As world leaders begin to ease restrictions and open up their economies, it has become clearer that weeks of lockdown and restrictions due to COVID-19 pandemic has had an adverse impact on productivity even more than was envisaged. On today's edition of International Trade Focus, we shall take a look at COVID-19 and its impact on labor, productivity, and employment, and whether there is hope in the months to come. My name is Anna Steele, and this is International Trade Focus. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Ghana Free Zones Authority. They say sharing good fortunes, supported by GOL, Good Energy, ADB, Truly, Agric, and more. International Trade Focus is also supported by Pediasi Valley Resort. Don't go away. This week's in-depth segment is coming to you from the University of Ghana. We spoke with Professor Ba Boateng on the impact of COVID-19 on employment, labor, and productivity. Our in-depth segment comes up next. The world is experiencing a massive decline in productivity and in the supply of goods and services as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that has led to millions of job losses. Now, will the world's economy be able to recover? And in the near future, are employees and the labor front assured of their jobs? Professor Ba Boateng is the head of the economics department of the University of Ghana and our guest on our in-depth segment today. Prof, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Can you share with us from the professional point of view the impacts that COVID-19 has had on labor, on the global and the local front?
Well, the COVID-19 is considered to be a shock to the global economy and, of course, to the national economy because nobody expected the COVID to happen. In Ghana, we prepared our budget and read it in November, and we didn't know that we were going to have this pandemic, and therefore we could not have put in measures to address the impact. So it's a shock to the Ghanaian economy and to the global economy, and the effect has been quite enormous, and from the economy to employment to everything. Because it has affected almost everything. It has brought economic activity to a halt, especially at a time when it was at its peak. And in Ghana, remember when we locked down, we realized that a lot of things had to be put on hold. So you have government trying to readjust. And therefore, in the public sector, workers were asked to come in shifts because we wanted to ensure that social distancing is respected. So we have people coming in shifts. In the private formal sector, we had the same thing. Of course, in the informal sector, we were afraid about how people were behaving, and therefore that brought about this lockdown and so on. And some enterprises were also have to resort to working from home to be able to achieve whatever they want to get as far as their operation is concerned. And when we put all these measures in place, you expect that you are not going to get the kind of productivity that you expect, because if you are working from home, it will not be the same as working under the supervision of your boss. And at the same time, if people are working on shift, you expect that you are not going to get the total output as it were. So it has to reduce working hours, and also productivity was affected. And in that instant, you expect that government is going to have revenue losses. We have the airports closed down. We have our harbor also having some challenges, because even though we're still having imports, the countries that were importing from were having their own challenges. So where were you going to import from? And also those countries that you are supposed to export to are also having. So it brought about a whole lot of things. Government has to contend with heavy losses in revenue. But at the same time, on planned expenditures, government was supposed to come up with unplanned expenditures. You can talk about the PPE that the government had to get. Additional ventilators. Hospitals might be put in. So all these things were unplanned expenditure for government while revenue was going down. Private sector also had their fair share of the impact, and some workers have to take pay cuts. Some workers have to also maybe be laid off temporary and so on. So the impact cut across. And even in the informal sector, you know, the informal sector is linked to the formal sector. So when formal sector is also having its challenge, the informal sector will not have demand for their activity. So if people are being laid off, people are having pay cut and so on, then you expect that the kind of thing that informal sector is going to patronize, that the kind of thing that formal sector is going to patronize in the informal sector will also go down. The informal sector will also have to have their fair share of the effect because they were not getting the demand that they wanted. So it affected the entire economy.
Talking about the lockdown and restriction on movement, there's a school of thought that says perhaps we focused much on saving lives instead of focusing on saving lives as well as saving or sustaining livelihoods. What's your take on this?
Well, I think when you are confronted with a shock like COVID-19 pandemic, the first thing is that you need to look at how you can save life. That's the first thing, because if there's no life, then there's no nation. The world is nowhere. The world will not exist. So first and foremost, you have to save life. It is like when somebody falls down or collapses, you have to resuscitate the person. Try to give the person first aid to get the person out of the coma, if the person coma, before you can administer drugs that will. So at the time, the global economy or the world leaders have to look at how we can contain the pandemic at that point in time. Because remember, even scientists didn't even know the behavior, the nature of this virus. And therefore, you have to run to be able to get people safe. And then you can think about, so for me, in the short term, whatever happened should have happened because we needed to save life. Then that will give you the opportunity to think as government, as world leaders, to be able to know how we'll be able to get the economy to also not to suffer. So there was that kind of balance. At that point in time, there was that lockdown because nobody knew the nature of the whole pandemic. So now I think scientists would know a bit about pandemic. Remember, people were saying that it is just about droplets from somebody who has had it. But now I'm told that even the virus can stay in the air for 7 hours. I mean, there are so many theories here and there. So when you have this kind of situation, you need to close your door and then see how you can save life. And then you get that kind of chance to think and see how you can balance the health and then the economy. Because if you also close down the economy and people don't have food to eat, it's still going to have the same effect as the pandemic. So at that point in time, it was good that we needed to find solution to the health issue within that immediate short-term period. And then we think through about how to balance it with the economy.
Prof, so with you being an economist, are you surprised with the number of job losses that have been recorded worldwide?
If you look at the whole thing, countries found solution to the problem in different ways. U.S. resorted to trying to pay unemployment benefit and therefore asked people who lost their job. And of course, if economic activities are not taking place, then you expect that people are not working and people would not have anything to do, but they have to eat, they have to survive. So in that instance, so long as economic activity comes to a halt, then job losses will follow. So that one, there's no two ways about it. So for US, they decided to go on the tangent of paying unemployment benefit. So you have about 30 million people now filed for unemployment benefit. So that is for US. You go to UK. UK rather said, well, let me pay a certain percentage of salaries of workers so that private sector will still retain their workers. They call it job retention scheme. So over there, you will not see the job loss because firms are still retaining their workers because they are being paid by the state. So that is also another dimension. And today I heard that the the head of Exchequer is going to talk about the fact that firms are supposed to pay a bit, about 20%, so that government will pay 80%. So that is also another dimension to it. So I wasn't surprised. It depends on the way you handle the situation. In Ghana, what did we do? We locked down. We realized that the economy is mostly informal and many people will not have anything to do. And about 85% of Ghanaian workforce are working in the informal sector, and they only get something to eat when they go out there to work. So when you lock down, it means they are not going to get anything. So the government has to find a way to feed them. Private sector also came in to feed them. So that was also something to also at least contain the situation. We still have some job losses from the former private sector. Remember, for the public sector, government cannot afford to ask people to go home. So all public sector workers are still, and we are still working. Private sector, especially those in the hotel industry, restaurants, and so on, they are the hardest hit. So you have people staying at home. I mean, even education, talking about private schools, they are also bearing the brunt of the COVID. So that is where it is. In some instances, firms decided to pay a percentage of salaries. Some could not help but to ask workers to stay at home. So if you look at the figure from where I sit, for the private formal sector, if you have 1.5 million people in the formal sector, and government takes about 600,000, so we are talking about 900,000 people in the private formal sector. So in that instance, how many of them? So those who will lose their job in the private formal sector will come from this 900,000, which is not as big as what you find in a more developed world where the labor market is more formal. You come to the informal sector, people are having ways of trying to survive within so you will not be able to quantify the number of people who have lost their job. But you can talk about people who, let's say the plumber who will, on a normal day, will be able to go to somebody's house to fix his WC, may not be welcomed because of COVID. So one way or the other, they are also having their own challenges and a lot of activities. So even though we can't quantify the job losses that we have in Ghana, we have a couple of them, but it's not as astronomical as we have in other countries where the labor market is more formal.
Let's take a look at this scenario. The US is paying benefits to those who've lost their jobs. The UK is paying 80% supporting employers. And in Ghana, we have the stimulus package. What's your take on the stimulus package and the requirements that various businesses need to meet in order to access the stimulus package? And first of all, is the stimulus package important? Is it beneficial to the business community?
Anytime we have a shock like what we are experiencing, you have to try and support those who will be adversely affected by the pandemic. So from business perspective, you realize that some have to stop operation totally. And in that instance, what are you going to do to support them? So government says this is stimulus package, about 600 million cedis support. My thinking is that it shouldn't be all size fits all. And government, the implementation of this stimulus package must be looked at very, very critically. Because remember, businesses produce for consumers to consume. And in economics, we say production is not complete unless the final product reaches the final consumer. Then you can say that production is complete. So if you have firms that have halted operation because of COVID, they have lost their working capital and so on, and you want to give them support, you have to also note that if you give them that support for them to start operation, are they going to get demand for the product that they are going to produce? So from where I sit, I would think that the support should go to firms, enterprises that have shown innovation. Remember, some enterprises have moved from their normal operation to look at other products that have demand. Some firms are now producing hand sanitizers, face masks, which have demand. So in that instance, when if these enterprises have lost their working capital, you know that when you stimulate them, whatever they are going to use that money for will have demand, so they can get return from it. But if you have a restaurant at the airport and that restaurant doesn't have working capital and you want to give that restaurant stimulus package and they start producing, who is going to buy that kind of product? So the implementation and the distribution of stimulus package should be thought through, we need to think through very, very critically, so that you will not give it to some sectors where demand for their product is not there. And stimulus package could be linked to Keynesian economics that brought out Great Britain and the world from recession in the 1930s. And here it was because there was poor or low demand and firms were not getting demand for their products. And then Keynes said, well, why don't we stimulate demand? And here that stimulus package stimulate demand. And when they stimulate demand through expansion and fiscal policy, people then had money to buy the goods that were not being bought. So then suppliers realized that now they have demand for their product. Then they started also producing, and therefore growth came up, and then they were able to move out of recession. In Ghana, is it because demand is low? Even if demand is low, is it because people don't have money to buy? It is because people are afraid of the COVID. So if a restaurant is not having demand for its product, it is because people are afraid to go and sit there and eat. And of course, we also have restrictions where 25 people cannot meet, and so on and so forth. So demand is not there. So if you even stimulate production from that end, you're not going to get demand, and therefore you are not going to get the benefit that you are looking for. So the implementation of a stimulus package must be looked at very well. It shouldn't be all size fits all. It shouldn't be.
So it should go to businesses that are considered important or essential during this.
I wouldn't say essential. It must go to enterprises that have demand for their products, so that when and who have some kind of challenges. So if indeed there is demand for hand sanitizer, there is demand for face mask, there is demand for drugs, there is demand for whatever you can think of, then these enterprises, if they are having problem with working capital, then a stimulus package will help them to produce to meet the demand. But if there is no demand for the product, then that firm will end up using the stimulus package to pay salaries. And if you pay salaries, how long can you sustain that? And we need to think about that very, very critically.
How then should we provide safety or cushion to people who are losing their jobs, people who are not considered essential, or people who don't have products that are in high demand during this period?
Well, it's a very difficult situation, and I don't want to be in the shoes of policy makers, because government itself is also suffering. Government doesn't have revenue, so you would say that the only way government can get out of it is to print money. And if you are going to print, just printing money, if you don't take care to, you are going to cause inflation. Or government should borrow. And if you borrow, to what extent can you continue to borrow? So that is where we need to look at. And if you are also looking at the private formal sector, where people have lost their job, and we consider they've lost their job, we have to also look at the self-employed, the informal sector, where people are also not getting, are not working, because they are not captured, as it were, in the formal settings. It becomes very difficult to also identify them. And we also have to also take into account those who have contributed something to the kitty. And here I'm talking about the tax. So firms that have demonstrated payment of taxes and so on, if indeed they are suffering and you want to support them, then the support will be in the form of some kind of facility, so that when they come out, they have to pay. But it shouldn't be just giving out something to firm because they are. And remember, if you also want people to be innovative, you can encourage. And you can encourage by making them innovative and shift into areas where there is demand. If it comes to even international trade, we may not necessarily have to worry about international trade so much. We can still, so long as we can have demand for our products outside. If you are exporting, it's a matter of having agent out there. So if China is ready to accept our products, If Netherlands is ready to accept our cocoa, I think you don't need to export the cocoa with a human being. I mean, it can go. So the problem now is our firms, or let's say countries that demand our products, they are having challenges, and therefore they don't have that kind of chance to say that let's think about import. So when things subside, I think export will pick up. The same applies to imports. Is it possible to get imports come up like the way it was before the COVID-19? We import a lot from China, we import from US, we import from Europe. So if Europe is not safe, then it becomes very difficult to also get goods. So I think within the pandemic, it becomes very difficult to talk about import and export. You only have import and export of essential kind of products that are very important within this period of COVID-19. And when we are able to contain it, business will pick up.
So let's take a look at the new normal, virtual meetings, working from home, and I mean, things in relation to that. Do you think this coming to take over the physical workforce?
It depends. People are talking about working from home, and let me say that working from home didn't start from COVID-19. They have been working from home all this while. Because in Ghana, we haven't experienced winter and very stormy winter. We don't do that. I mean, if you go to the US and North America and so on, where sometimes winter will not even allow you to even go to school or go to work, then you are compelled to work from home. So working from home is a necessity. A necessity is a matter of invention. So working from home has come because of the pandemic. However, you can work from home depending on the activity you are engaged in. There are different sectors in the economy. You cannot work from home if you are a construction worker. If you are constructing roads, you cannot construct roads from your home. You have to be there. If you are a restaurant worker and you are a chef, you cannot cook from home. At least you should be there to do something. So there are certain activities. Mining is an example. You cannot. Agriculture is an example. By all means, your physical presence there, even in manufacturing, those who are supposed to be on the factory floor, your presence there is very important. So there are certain activities that working from home will be very, very difficult. But there are others, like teaching. I mean, you can teach online, and we have been teaching online, even though we have our own challenges, but we are still trying to do our best. But even that, it is very difficult to say that it's going to replace the normal one. It depends on infrastructure. You can work from home if you have electricity. You can work from home if your internet is very stable. But in these times, if electricity is stable and your internet is fine, then you would not want workers, you don't want to worry workers to come to the workplace. And it means that you can keep the skeleton staff at the workplace and they can still work from home and so on. So long as the infrastructure, digital infrastructure, electricity is a challenge, we don't expect that it will change, because within the pandemic, people are afraid to go out there to catch the virus. And therefore, you'll be compelled, no matter what it is, you'll still try to use the limited facility that you have. But when things subside and the virus vanishes, which I hope it will leave us, and we still have problem with infrastructure, firms cannot afford to lose their customers, because workers are working from home and they are not able to meet delivery time. No, then you say that, well, if your internet is worrying you, then you have to come and work at in the factory. So that is where I am coming from. If the infrastructure is there, then you can still achieve whatever you want to do, even when you are at the workplace. Then in that instant, you can see that, well, this new normal can become normal. But so long as where we find ourselves, we have deficit in infrastructure, I don't think in the medium term it will come to stay. It will get to a point where the infrastructure will force us to go back to how we used to do our businesses.
If you just tuned in, you're watching International Trade Focus. Our guest for today is the head of the economics department at the University of Ghana, Professor Boateng. We're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on productivity and on the supply of goods and services. We'll be back shortly. You're still watching International Trade Focus. Professor Boateng is the head of the economics department at the University of Ghana and our guest for today. We're taking a look at the impact COVID-19 has had on productivity and on the supply of goods and services. COVID-19 has opened our eyes to so many things. As far as economy is concerned, what lessons do you think we should learn from this? And going forward, what measures or steps or policies can we put in place to ensure that should anything of this nature happen again, we'll be protected, our economy will be protected?
Well, I'm told that the last time we had this kind of pandemic globally was in 1918. And I watched CNN and I saw people wearing face masks. So face mask is not something new. So people are saying that every century or every 100 years we have this kind of challenge. But at every point in time, government and private sector individuals must be prepared for any kind of eventuality, any kind of pandemic that of whatever nature that it will take. And that is why we need to improve on our savings culture. As individuals, we need to improve on our savings culture. However small your earnings are, you should be able to save a bit of it against the future. In economics, we hold money for transaction, precautionary, and speculative purpose. But it looks like we always look at the transaction. We're now looking at the precautionary and also the speculative, which is saving against the future. If you earn 1,000 cedis, you try as much as possible to consume within your means. And if you say, I'm going to save 10%, 20%, 200 cedis, or even 100 cedis out of 1,000, at the end of the year, you have 1,200. So when something happens, then you will be able to fall on it. The same applies to firms. Firms must also know that we are not living for today. We are also living for tomorrow. And therefore, savings culture must also be promoted by businesses. Government should also consider that as well. We have been carrying fiscal deficit for a long time. I think it's high time we cut our coat according to our size and also think about how best we can also save. I don't think UK will be able to pay a certain percentage of salary of workers if they don't have any reserve. So it means that they've been able to accumulate that for a long time. I think it's high time we begin to look at savings and then see how best we can. I mean, we are told we have the Heritage Fund and so on and so forth. There are so many issues regarding the Heritage Fund. I have said that how much the Heritage Fund giving us, if you are going to get 1% every year, but we have to go and borrow 10%, then we have to rethink about how we save. We need to build our savings culture as individuals, as private sector, as government against any eventuality. And also we need to take our insurance very serious. And insurers should know that if they sell a very good product, people will buy. Insurers shouldn't only concentrate on now selling insurance product of death. Oh, we have this product, funeral, and this is that. I think this also gives an opportunity to come up with a product against some of these pandemics.
In the meantime, how do we protect or sustain our workforce? Here is a case where, say, a factory registers one case of COVID-19 and then 500 or 300 of the workforce have to be at home. People who have dependents, I mean, they are losing salaries and all of that. So from where you sit, what kind of measures can government put in place in order to save our workforce during this period?
I always say that, why do we always say what can government do? But we don't say that what can we as individuals also do? So it becomes like everybody thinks that his father has money. So even if the father is struggling, oh, my father has money. So everybody thinks that government has money, government has it all, and therefore government has to do everything. Government can put policies in place. I think that this pandemic also opens up another avenue for private sector. In Ghana and in many developing countries, when we talk about social protection, we normally talk about pension. So we pay our pension 5% and 13.5% and so on. But we haven't thought of unemployment insurance. We know that everybody paid for insurance as far as his vehicle is concerned because we know accidents will occur and so on. But now this pandemic has shown us that we also need to go beyond pension and also have some kind of unemployment insurance such that when workers lose their job, they will have something to fall on. So moving forward, I think the private sector should take advantage of this pandemic, especially insurance companies, to design insurance products that workers will be able to buy, including informal sector workers. Informal sector where they pay susu. Why do they pay susu? They pay susu so at the end of the day they will get something in bulk to work on. So at the same time, if we are able to design a very good insurance product and backed by legislation, then as we pay 5%, 8.5%, then we will also pay maybe 1 or 2% of our salary towards that kind of insurance, so that if it becomes so necessary that we cannot help it, but you have to stay at home because government doesn't have it, employer doesn't have it, and you have to, then we will get a place to fall on. So that it will be the private sector's, the suggestion that I will give to private sector. We have to be innovative to be able to get that. Elsewhere, we have unemployment benefit, we have unemployment insurance. It's high time we also look at that. What can government do? In the short term, it becomes very difficult for me to prescribe what government can do. What government has to do is what they have done. I said during the pandemic that government can only help cushion people from electricity bill, from water, from telecommunication and so on. So that is where government can help. So, and government has given us half, is paying half of our electricity consumption. Water is free. So government has done it, and I think government will continue to do that over the next 1 month. And I think that is a short-term thing that government can do. In the longer, in the medium term, government will then have to back this unemployment insurance thing with legislation, so that every worker and every employer will have to make some small contribution to that fund, so that if it shouldn't be pandemic, but if something happens, maybe that company collapses, there's a shock and it affects that company collapses and firms have to and they have to lay off workers, then you'll be able to fall on unemployment insurance. That will be the medium to long term. In the longer term, government also needs to improve on the digital infrastructure, because future of work is here with us. We have been talking about future of work for a long time, but I can say future of work is here with us, and it will not be static, it will be dynamic. So government investment into digital infrastructure is very crucial. In terms of electricity, I think diversification of our energy source must also be looked at. Not only looking at the thermal and also the hydro. We need to help people to also have the solar. I mean, if government is able to reduce taxes on inputs into solar production of solar electricity, then at least individuals will be able to go into solar and then move away from the national grid. And then we'll be able to get power to those who will not be able to get solar. So that is also another area that I think government needs to look at. Infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and energy.
Let's look at our continent and the impact of COVID-19 on our continent as far as the economy is concerned. What's your take on this?
The impact of COVID-19 on the continent will not be even across countries, because countries are not the same. Some countries are landlocked. Some countries have oil. Some countries have other resources. Remember when the COVID was at its peak, the pandemic was at its peak, oil prices went so low. So Nigeria, for instance, will have will bear a bigger brand when it comes to oil. Ghana, we had our fair share as it were. Now, I know oil prices are picking up, so we see that, I think. So then Nigeria has that. If you go to Botswana, they have diamond. If you go to South Africa, mostly manufacturing. So it depends on each country. And I mean, you go to Burkina Faso, mostly agriculture. And for the pandemic, I think agriculture will be the sector that will not be hardly hit, because the pandemic will not affect our products. Our farming activity. So we will still be able to do our farming. So thanks be to God, agriculture will be spared. There will be some kind of effect, but it will not be as big. If we get the rain on time and so on, then it means that we will be safe for agriculture. But countries, the resource-based countries, will have to look at the resource that they are exporting and where they are exporting to. So Ghana's cocoa, where do we export our cocoa to? This time, I think we will not be able to do much because we don't have control over it. But as time goes on, if these countries now begin to ease restriction and economic activities begin to pick up, then we will also, it will then trickle down to exporters to be able to do that. So countries will, the effect on countries will depend on, countries that depend mostly on agriculture will not have the effect to be as big as countries that depend on oil and also other resources that are mostly exported, and those countries, the destination countries, are also having challenges.
How would you assess the performance of world leaders during this COVID-19 period, as far as trying to save their economies and all of that is concerned? How will you assess their performance?
Well, you have to look at them differently.
Do you think even the giants have been exposed?
Yes, giants have been exposed, but you cannot talk about China. Somebody will say, well, China is where the thing started, so they were able to. So China is back. And I'm sure US will be back, UK will be back. I think China did not panic. I mean, from where I sit, there could be something that some of us don't know. But when it happened, China did not panic so much. But I think other countries panicked, especially when it hit Italy and people were dying in droves. Then other countries began to panic. Many, of course, South Korea also have done well. They've been able to contain the situation. Germany, looking at how strong their health system is, have also done very, very well. So they are still strong. But some other countries are still, I know US is still struggling because they are still having infections every day. So not until they are able to bring it down. And of course, yes, and we are talking about over 30 million people filing for unemployment benefit. So I think US would have done, could have handled it a bit better. But I think you can also spare them because perhaps they didn't also understand the nature of this virus. Remember, WHO said people will die on the street in Africa. But what are we saying? I mean, we've done very well. Ghana has done extremely well in containing the situation. And I think we shouldn't, we should pat ourselves in the back and say that we've all done well, except that we can do better by listening to our president and listening to our leaders to be able to wear the face masks. You know, even in the office, I try to wear my face mask, try to respect social distancing, and we'll be able to contain it. The leaders can do their best, but if individuals also don't listen, then we will not be able to contain it. I think we've done our best, and if we continue to do that, I think it will be okay. So rating world leaders, during the heat of the pandemic, they panicked, and you can't blame them why they panicked. But they were also trying to balance health and then economy. And now they are easing restrictions gradually. And I think by the end of the year, we'll be able to assess countries better.
So looking at the toll that it has taken on international trade, do you think it will take us very, very long for us to recover, as some experts or economists are saying?
And I will still say it will depend on countries, from country to country. So if you are selling a very important or if you are exporting a very important product, you still, as soon as restrictions are eased, then you can get your exports through, because oil is very important. So as soon as restrictions are eased and economic activities begin to pick up and people will begin to use oil as it were before the pandemic, then we'll have demand for oil, and then we'll be able to pick up gradually. Yes, it will take time, and even all of us will have to brace up for the effect, because most of our research grants that we get come from international donors. So if now all the attention is going to COVID, and so surpluses for them to also support research will also be affected. So I know that the effect will be from country to country and from sector to sector. But I think I haven't done any rigorous research to be able to predict. But from observation, I think by the end of 2021, I think we should be able to say that we've been able to get out of it at least about 70%.
Okay. Professor Babu, I think we're about leaving, but before we go, do you have any final words for us?
My final word is that the COVID-19 is real. It is not a fluke. If it hasn't gotten closer to you, you may think that it is far from you. So my plea is that we all have to respect the protocols that the health authorities are giving us. We try to wear our face masks. I know it's not too comfortable to wear it, but it is better to wear it and feel uncomfortable than to get the virus and you don't know whether it will send you to your grave. It is better to social distance or respect physical distance and also get the virus out of our land than to die. I think we all have to respect the protocol. I feel very worried when I drive in town, especially where people are selling, and I see the way people are not wearing the face mask and they are talking. I mean, I get a bit worried. This is pandemic. It will be with us, but if it will leave us very soon, it depends on our behavior. And I plead that we all respect the protocols and get this virus away from us.
That was Professor Babu, the head of the economics department at the University of Ghana. We took a look at productivity and how COVID-19 has affected it, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on supply of goods and services. We'll be back shortly. And it's a wrap for today's edition of International Trade Focus. Join us same time next week for some more on international trade-related activities here in Ghana and beyond. Follow us on all our social media platforms for more updates on international trade-related activities. My name is Anas Pio, but before we leave, we'd like to say special thanks to the sponsors of this program. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Ghana Free Zones Authority. They say sharing good fortunes, call good energy, ADB, Truly, Agric, and more. International Trade Focus is also supported by Pediasi Valley Resort. Until we meet again, same time next week, stay safe.